Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogrammed Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. And Chantal Donnelly, physical therapist and author of Settled, How to Find Calm in a Stress-Inducing World. We follow our guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us.
Welcome back to the ANEW Insight Podcast. We are here for the second half of our interview with coach and author and speaker, Deanna Moffitt. Very excited to have you here. Our first half of the episode, if you haven't heard, go back and listen. It's really interesting to hear how Deanna became a coach and became an author, some fun stuff there. And let's get in more into the book. I really want to talk about the Rewrite Your Book this episode and really kind of give our listeners an idea of what that book's about, because I've read it and it's wonderful. So glad to have you back.
Thanks, Chantal. Pleasure to be here, both Chantal and Supatra. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let's get into it. I know that your book is about the stories we tell ourselves and how they can tend to keep us stuck, not moving forward in our lives. You have said that there are three kinds of stories we tell ourselves. What are those three stories?
Yeah, we usually tell ourselves some great historical fiction, some current day, present reality, fictional reality, and usually catastrophizing or a future dystopian future stories. What I recognize is that, all those different places, we are telling ourselves stories about our past that aren't serving us. We're telling stories about our present moment, the thing that just happened that isn't serving us. And we're certainly telling ourselves stories about what we think the future is going to be that we couldn't possibly know and definitely are not serving us.
Mm-hmm. Well, go into that a little bit more. I relate to that with my clients. I feel like my clients are either stuck in the past or the future or both.
Yeah.
And so what's like the historical story normally?
Yeah, those are the ones I usually refer to that were created oftentimes before we even recognize, right? Before the ages of 7, when we're in our childlike minds, our child status, and we can't process the world. We can't process reasoning, why people are reacting a certain way. And oftentimes we're making the world about us, because at that age, it really is. And so even slight things that we don't understand, we can make about us, like a dad coming home and not wanting to play with you when you're a kid, and you don't realize that he's completely stressed, overworked, worried about money, but in your head, you're not worthy of his attention, or right? And we can create these stories that are deeply embedded in us. I think my story that I grappled with for a long time was I'm a burden, or I'm alone. Those are two stories that I really held on to for a long time. And they're so deep in our subconscious, right? These stories that we created, often from either one big experience that we may not even be able to point back to what it is, or like driving on a gravel road, just little pockmarks that happen over and over that create some dents in our lives. But those stories are the basis of our behaviors, whether we know it or not, right? So you can imagine someone who considers themselves to be a burden for people might be over-pleasing, or might get into like codependent relationships really easy. And I don't want to ask for anything that I might need, because if I do, what will happen? Someone won't want me, and all of those stories. And when we really take a look at the behaviors, they're getting us results that we don't want. One of the things we can do is go back and try and figure out, what is the story I'm telling myself? And there could be little offshoots that could mean something else, right? But the core of it, your core story, and they can be called, I think Catherine Woodward Thomas calls them the core wounds, the core wounded stories we have. And for a lot of people, those are really hard to identify. We can identify the results we're getting, but those core stories, hard to see, and yet they're always present with us. And I think they're also, unless we really get the body involved with those, I think this is one of those things where we can do all the talking we want. But it really took me doing a lot of kind of whole body modalities for me to really shift those stories. And then the present day stories, those are the ones that we get emotionally hooked in. You know, someone cuts you off in traffic and what an idiot, I can't believe. And then all of a sudden we're emotionally out, and we're out of our bodies almost. We're kind of in this space, in this moment, and reacting emotionally to a situation that's happening to us. And sometimes we can't even understand that we're not reacting to this thing, that story is connected to something else, but we're in this space of having overreactions, and the story then becomes, oh, that idiot, I can't believe he's an idiot, and you kind of feed,
or that dum-dum.
Yeah, that's you keep on feeding. Nice callback by Supatra. But we just feed that, and it's so interesting how we can continue to feed that emotional state. It's like feeding, little pellets to the bear at the zoo. You just keep feeding it, as opposed to recognizing, oh, I don't like this feeling. I don't like being stressed out. I don't like the shoulders going up and the stomach being knotted, but I'm still cycling around this. Again, how do I get back in my body so I can let that story go? I remember when I first moved to Chicago from Portland, Oregon, no one honks their horn here. I mean, literally, you could stop at a stoplight for 10 seconds and the light is green and no one honks their horn here. So when I moved to Chicago, and that is a completely different, people are honking their horns. There's, it was totally different driving culture. And within about 2 weeks of driving the highways of Chicago, I became Linda Blair in The Exorcist. Now that is really only a reference that a certain number of people are going to be listening. Look at that. But
I watched The Bear, so yeah. I get it.
I just felt like my head was spinning. I was spewing. I was cursing. All my fingers would go up. And I recognized, I was really going into victim mode so quickly. And I had to catch myself and go, oh, what is that? And what if I just started telling myself, oh, they're probably in a hurry. Oh, maybe their wife is pregnant. Oh, they're having a, baby. Whatever it is, to allow me not to get emotionally hooked.
That happened on The Bear.
Yeah, right?
Spoiler. Sorry.
And then the future stories are those stories that we create that are often the worst, dystopian future of what we think is possible for us. Or we have a situation and, everything is going to go into chaos because of what that future looks like. Instead of just staying present, we have no possible idea of what the future is like. And what if we could actually build a muscle of creating a story that might be positive? Like, it could be amazing. It could be wonderful. And yet, boy, is that not a muscle that is so atrophied and so weak in most of us, because our stories about our future often go to a really dark place.
They sure do. Yeah. These stories that you're talking about, whether they are past, present, future, how do they get formed in general, and why is it that they become so limiting? Is that just human nature? What is that about?
Yeah, I think it is. I think all of us. I mean, I remember I was at an event and I had an opportunity to meet the CEO of Vitamix, and it was kind of this mastermind meeting, and so it was small enough that we all got to engage with her. And it was Vitamix at the time is a family ran organization, quite obviously successful. But I remember asking, her name was Jody, and I remember asking, what does she do with her limiting beliefs? Because she was obviously so successful. And she just looked at me like I was a strange person. And she said, limiting belief? What's that? And
That's awesome.
I was like,
answered your question
wow.
right there.
I had never heard of no one ever not having a limiting belief. I think most of us at some point or another will grapple with this idea of a limiting belief. And again, I think
Totally.
they are often, but certainly not always, created in our most young and tender times, and they go deep into our subconscious. But certainly they can go, we can create them, and they can be recreated and again when we have experiences, usually with people. I usually think that these stories are created in relationship with other people. And which is why I often think that the stories, if they're to change, are often have to be done in relationship with other people, with a therapist, with a coach, with someone to affirm you as you are, that, to help you see the possibility of a different story. It's a really hard thing to recreate our stories, I believe, without someone being able to kind of reflect back the truth of who you are, or help you to see the potential that's in front of you with all the different data set points that are available to you.
Well, that is actually leading into my next question. What would be the first step that someone can take to identify the story that they need to have rewritten?
I mean, it just always is going to start with awareness, right? To be able to take a moment to reflect. I always say people like to think that we learn from experience, and I just think that's not true. Because we all know someone who's dated the same kind of person over and over and over again.
Me!
Yeah, have the same kind of experience over
Not
and
now.
over and over again. But right, it's not until you start reflecting on that experience that you're like, oh, okay, here's what happens. This is the person I'm attracted to. This is what happens for me, right? So it's really that ability to reflect on what is the experience I'm having that I don't want to have anymore. And sometimes it's even not just the experience outwardly, but the experience inwardly as well. Like, what's happening in my body? And Chantal has taught me this word, interoception, right? What's happening in my body, and aware of it. Where is my pain? Where's my gut doing? What is my back and my muscles doing? Awareness, it's always going to start with awareness. And I mean, before awareness, really, there just has to be a willingness. Like sometimes there has to be a willingness to be aware, because for some people it can feel kind of re-traumatizing to go back and have to think about and work on, where were these stories created, what happened to me, what was going on. And so I think the first bit of it is just a willingness, maybe a courageousness, a little dose of courage to be able to look at that, and then working on awareness of what's really going on.
It definitely takes courage. Yeah. And I think a lot of those limiting beliefs are meant to protect us initially, right? And so to let go of that guard, that protection, takes a lot of courage, because we don't know what's on the other side. And so I think that's partly why you have to be willing and do the work. And I know in your book, because I've read it a couple of times, I know in your book you talk about your own limiting stories, your own narratives, and how you have changed some of those stories personally. Can you tell us about some of those? And maybe there's some new ones that have come up since you've written the book?
Oh, why? Yes, I can. I mean, I think I told you, I had the story of I'm a burden, which was I wasn't quite sure where that came up. And I was working with a coach, and I think for me, that story came out almost before consciousness, right? I was adopted, and I think somatically, or in my body, I had an understanding that my birth mother did not want me. And I couldn't imagine how challenging that was for her, to carry a baby that she knew she didn't want, and to give that baby up. But at some level, my cellular being took that as an understanding of I'm a burden,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, it was really, writing this book, going through the process and working with a coach, to be quite honest with you, to start shaping a different story of I'm a blessing. I'm a blessing
Yes.
instead of a burden. And, it's the funny thing is, you get what you start asking for. And so I really worked with that. And what would it feel like? I mean, imagine just both of you right now, if you had been walking around with the story of I'm a burden, what that might feel like in your body, and then try on the story of I'm a blessing. And
Oh,
how does that
yes.
feel differently? And I mean, I just remember thinking like, well, man, if I could walk around the world like that, wouldn't I just be lit up and be amazing? And so I really took that on. And then in March, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and I came and I was with her for 3 months. And I can't tell you how many times her friends would tell me, while I was helping my mom, Deanna, you are such a blessing. You are such a blessing. And I
Oh.
was like, I want to be a burden. There's just moments of like, ooh, this is hard work. I think I want to be a burden again. No, but it's funny how I was like, oh, there it is. That's the reflection of it back to me. And I can say honestly, Chantal, I love that you asked that question. I've been able to rewrite the story of my mom and my relationship during this time. And that was a real rewrite for me. And part of it was, how do I show up differently from being a burden to being a blessing with her or for myself as well? So
Yeah, I have a few adoptees in my practice, and that is, I think, the most common thought is
yeah,
I am a burden or I am not
not
wanted.
wanted. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. And then how do you overcome that? I love changing that narrative into I am a blessing. Because when you think about it, you did
Right.
bless another family with your
Yeah.
presence. Your presence was wanted, even if your birth mother was unable. And
Yeah.
I can only imagine how difficult that might be for a mother to give up their child. I don't think anyone's like, here, take my child. I think you think about it every single day of your life. And so I think having that in your mind as well, I bet my mom is thinking about me. I bet she's wondering how I'm doing. That can also help to lift you out of that I'm a burden narrative. Now, tell me, speaking of lifting yourself, you have become a Qigong instructor, which is amazing. You started studying breathing techniques and this movement practice called Ishtara. How do these practices tie into rewriting your story?
It came through really the understanding that the stories are not just here, that the story has been lodged in my body, right, energetically somewhere else as well. Qigong, which is an ancient practice of kind of moving meditative practice, much like Tai Chi, is all about energy. Qi is energy and Gong is work or play. And really understanding that the stories are stuck energy in our bodies. And how do you move that energy or free up that energy or, transform it into something else? I became really fascinated by that. And when I came up here to help my mom, I had previously helped my dad go through a cancer diagnosis and end up passing. And when I said, yes, I'm coming up, I also said, I'm not going to do it the same way because I completely lost myself in my dad's illness. And I didn't have any tools. I didn't know how to take care of myself during all that. And so when I was up here and during one of the most stressful times that I was going through, and she had some health things that really escalated very quickly, And I was struggling and I had other things I wanted to do. You know, I packed a bag for 5 days and I ended up being here for 3 months. And I have had a life that I was supposed to be leading outside of this. There's a question I asked myself, and that was, what in all of this is for me? And believing that even the terrible things that we go through, if I can look at those and say, well, these are for me as well. What am I learning? What am I set to do? What am I set to learn in all this? And man, I'm going to tell you, Supatra, the moment I asked that question, my whole energy shifted.
Yes.
And I started looking for the things that were here for me. And, you know, I started investigating so many different healing modalities and trying on and sampling and being playful with that and understanding that there may be a version 2 of the rewrite, to say this is one way to rewrite your stories is up here, but there's another way to rewrite these stories completely in your body and energetically as well.
Beautiful. I love that.
I don't know if our listeners know the story, but Deanna and I actually wrote our books at the same time with the same publishing company.
I did not know this.
Yes. And so we would get on Zoom and write together. And then after the writing session, we would read to each other. And she was reading all of the mindset information that was in her beautiful book. And I would be reading all about the body stuff. And so it's funny because we've learned from each other how important, I learned from her how important the mind is, and she's learned from me how important the body is. And I think together we really sort of helped each other in that way.
I'm going to tell you, Supatra, I could not have gotten through that writing process without Chantal.
Oh, I bet.
Ditto. Same thing.
Chantal is a blessing. I've known Chantal for now, 21 years. And every time I see her, every time I'm in her presence, I always think what a blessing she is. And I've learned so much about the body, too, from her. So that's
I'm proud
amazing.
of both of you for being in your bodies. Very proud of you.
You help us.
Yeah, thanks, my friend. Really, truly.
Works the other way around, too. So that's great from both of you. All right. Now that we've patted each other on the back, can you tell us, Deanna, what kind of services do you offer people, if you could let everybody know, and then how they can get in touch with you if they're interested?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think things are shifting for me, and I'm not quite sure what services I'm going to be providing. So listen, things are always up in the air. I do provide coaching and certainly leadership development, but it's been interesting to me, the last few deliveries that I've done with leadership development is bringing in more personal development and energy tools, which are completely unexpected and so needed and well received. So if you are working for an organization and you think you want leadership development, yes, I can do the strategy and I can do the feedback and all that stuff. But man, what I am finding now, especially with things shifting so quickly, is that our leaders really need, as you would say, get back in their bodies.
Yes.
They need to be able to question their thoughts, and they need to be able to stay present to what is right here in front of them. So it's a really interesting shift that I'm in right now, but I offer coaching services, of course, and they can reach me at my website at deannamoffitt.com, all those double letters that are in my name. I'm also on Instagram, and you can find my book on Amazon, The Rewrite.
Wonderful. I love this. I think you're actually right. I just gave a talk for a bunch of insurance agents, and I had a whole list of things. It could have been how to, present yourself better. What they wanted was mindfulness.
Yes.
They loved it too. Like all of the comments were, oh my gosh, I needed this so much today. I feel my body was one of the comments. And I think really kind of helping leaders shift that thinking into being present, like you were talking about before, not just in improv, but, to understand your story, but also to get better at anything you do. To be mindful, it does mean to be present and aware, and it's not just up here, it's in your body. And I think it's vital for people to really start to incorporate that, because it can make them, they realize that they can be better at sales because they're more mindful and they're more present with their people. So I'm supporting you on that. Get out there and get these people in their bodies. Do it.
Get in their bodies, and also just being present to our own intuitive abilities. I think we've lost that for some reason. Our ability to be intuitive and read the energy, not only our own energy, but the energy of the people that are in the room. Can I be intuitive enough to that, to experience someone else's energy, or to sit and be present and feel and hear the messages that are coming up for me, not just top down, but my body is always talking to me as well, and not just not I was going to say not just through farts and burps, but really energetically.
Those two.
But like the messages that you get, or if you're willing to listen to them, I think it's pretty profound.
Oh man. Wow. We would love to pick your brain for more hours, but sadly we are out of time for this half of this podcast, but we would love for you to come back at any time. You radiate positivity, joy, just this goodness, and we definitely need more of that, especially during these times. So we're very grateful for the work that you're doing, and we're grateful for everyone for listening in. Thank you so much for tuning into the ANEW Body Insight Podcast. We look forward to our next exciting interview, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Body Insight Podcast. Please remember, the content shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Body Insight Podcast tab. Follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.